There are mornings when the sunlight touches your skin, but you feel nothing. When your body goes through the familiar rhythm of waking, standing, walking, breathing, but the life inside you feels distant, disconnected, almost silent. You open your eyes, but they don't hold curiosity. You take in the day, but it doesn't feel like yours. You wonder if something's broken inside you, something invisible but deeply essential, and you try to shake it off. Try to pretend it's just fatigue or too little sleep. But deep down, you know, it's not your body that's tired, it's your soul. There's a kind of weariness that doesn't come from doing too much, but from being too disconnected for too long. So you start your day like usual. You brush your teeth, wash your face, maybe scroll through your phone, hoping the world can wake you up in ways your spirit hasn't. But nothing changes. The numbness lingers. You move through the hours like a ghost inside your own life. People greet you, you smile, you answer questions, you nod at the right times, you even laugh. But it's all hollow, like a song you've heard too many times, playing in the background of a life that no longer feels like yours. And eventually you start asking the questions you've been avoiding. Where did I lose myself? When did I stop feeling alive? Why does everything feel so far away? You try to remember when you last felt joy that wasn't manufactured, when you last felt peace that wasn't fleeting, when you last felt connected to something deeper than the surface rituals of your routine. But it's hard. The memory slips away like a dream you forgot upon waking. You realize you've been surviving, not living, not thriving, just surviving. And somewhere along the way, you learn to normalize that, to normalize disconnection, to normalize pretending, to normalize being okay with not being okay. And that normalization, it numbed your senses, dimmed your fire, and made silence feel safer than truth. But there's another truth that begins to whisper, a quiet one, the kind that doesn't demand attention, but asks gently to be felt. It's the truth that your soul has not given up. It's waiting for you to come back. Waiting for you to notice the small aches you've ignored, waiting for you to stop running from the parts of yourself that you buried because they were inconvenient, too sensitive, too messy, too much. Your soul isn't angry, it's just tired of being forgotten, and now it wants to be heard, so you sit. Maybe for the first time in days, no distractions, no music, no scrolling, just silence. And at first, the silence feels unbearable. Every part of you wants to escape it, but you stay, you breathe, and slowly the noise inside your mind begins to settle. Your thoughts stop racing, your body stops fidgeting, and in that stillness, something ancient stirs, not in words but in sensation, a faint pulse, a distant echo, the reminder that beneath your fear, beneath your numbness, beneath your detachment, something sacred still lives. You haven't lost yourself completely. You've just forgotten how to come home. Coming home to yourself isn't always dramatic. It doesn't require a breakdown or a revelation. Sometimes it's as simple as breathing deeply for the first time in days. Sometimes it's noticing the way sunlight falls through your window and letting yourself feel something about it. Sometimes it's saying no when you've always said yes. Sometimes it's crying without rushing to wipe the tears away. Sometimes it's telling someone, "I'm not okay," and letting that be the truth without trying to fix it immediately. These small moments, they matter. They're the breadcrumbs that lead you back to yourself. And as you begin to collect those moments, something shifts. Not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly, like the way dawn pushes back the night. Not with force, but with light. You begin to feel things again. At first, it's uncomfortable. Emotions come in waves, some gentle, some overwhelming, but you don't run. You stay, you let the feelings come, the grief, the longing, the loneliness, the love, all of it. And you realize that feeling deeply is not a curse, it's a return to your humanity, a return to your heart. You start to recognize the parts of you that you've been ignoring. The inner child who still feels unworthy, the dreamer who gave up when life got too loud, the artist who stopped creating because there was never time, the believer who lost faith after too many disappointments. They all begin to reappear, not to haunt you, but to remind you. Not, how do I make this go away? But what do I need to feel safe in myself again? These questions don't have immediate answers, but asking them opens a door to gentleness, a door to self-compassion, a door to healing that doesn't rush, doesn't perform, doesn't need to be perfect, just present, honest, true. You realize that healing isn't linear, that some days you'll feel like yourself again, full of laughter and energy and clarity, and other days you'll feel lost, tired, heavy. But you stop judging yourself for it. You stop thinking that healing has to look a certain way. You let it be messy. You let it be real. You let it be yours. And in that letting go, you discover a deeper kind of strength, the kind that doesn't come from having it all together, but from allowing yourself to be fully human. You start reclaiming the things that make you feel alive, the walks without destination, the music that makes you cry, the food that reminds you of childhood, the books that make you think, the laughter that surprises you. You stop waiting for permission to enjoy life. You stop believing joy has to be earned. You allow yourself to receive, not just responsibilities and expectations, but beauty and wonder and softness. Because life isn't just about surviving pain. It's also about opening to joy, even in the middle of it. You begin to surround yourself with honesty, with people who don't expect you to perform happiness, with spaces where truth is more valued than image, with moments where your soul can exhale, and in those spaces, you heal without trying. You remember who you are without effort. You reconnect not through grand gestures, but through presence, through being held, through being seen, through being accepted without condition. And slowly, you realize, you're not lost. You're just returning to the version of you that's always been underneath the noise, the fear, the silence, returning to the truth that you are not broken, you are unfolding, and your unfolding is holy. There's nothing wrong with you. There never was. You were just tired, and now you are remembering. And in that remembering, you are being reborn. You begin to feel something shifting inside you, not loud, not obvious, but undeniable. It's the sensation of coming back to life, not in a sudden awakening, but in quiet reawakenings that happen throughout your day. You feel it in the way you no longer force yourself to smile when you don't feel like it, in the way you sit with your discomfort instead of immediately looking for a distraction, in the way your tears come more freely now, not as a breakdown, but as a breakthrough. And you realize that this softness returning to your life is not weakness, it's strength wearing no armor. It's truth finding its way back through every layer that once kept it hidden. You no longer need to perform being okay. You've grown tired of the masks, the one that says, I'm fine, even when your world is unraveling. The one that nods in agreement just to avoid tension. The one that laughs in rooms where your silence would have been more honest. And you start to question, how many times have I abandoned myself just to keep the peace? How often have I chosen comfort for others over honesty for myself? And the answers are sobering, but they are also clarifying. Because now you are choosing differently, not in defiance, but in devotion. Devotion to the truth, devotion to your own wholeness. You begin to see how deeply you've been taught to fear your own needs, to believe that wanting rest is laziness, that needing connection is weakness, that asking for help is failure. You've been praised for being low maintenance, for not being a burden, for handling everything on your own. And for a while you wore those things like medals. But medals are heavy, and now you are laying them down. You are no longer aspiring to be self-sufficient at the cost of your own tenderness. You are allowed to need. You are allowed to ask. You are allowed to receive. And you are learning that being held is not weakness, it's medicine. You begin to feel your body again, not just as a tool, not just as something to manage, but as a sacred home. You stop punishing it for being tired. You stop ignoring it when it whispers. You start honoring the signals, the hunger, the ache, the tension, the joy. You stretch, you rest, you breathe deeply, not because it's a ritual, but because your body deserves your attention. You realize that healing is not just a mental process. It's physical, emotional, spiritual. And your body, long ignored or shamed, becomes a compass, guiding you back to balance. You notice the ways you've been addicted to urgency, the need to do, to fix, to achieve, to answer. The way you've measured your worth by how much, and the answer scares you at first because when the busyness fades, all that's left is you. But eventually that answer begins to soothe you too, because in that stillness, you begin to see yourself not as broken or behind, but as worthy, simply for being. You begin forgiving yourself for the times you didn't know better, for the years you spent in survival mode, for the relationships you stayed in too long, for the dreams you gave up on too soon, for the boundaries you didn't yet know how to set. You stop holding yourself hostage to your past decisions. You understand that self-forgiveness is not erasure, it's integration. It's saying, yes, I was there, and I'm here now, and both versions of me deserve compassion. You stop judging your healing by how quickly you get over something. You start measuring it by how tenderly you can hold the parts of you that are still hurting. You also start to trust your emotions again, not as obstacles to overcome, but as messengers. When sadness arises, you don't push it away. You ask, what are you showing me? When anger flares, you don't suppress it. You ask, what boundary was crossed? When joy comes, you don't question it. You let it flood your being without apology. You stop ranking your emotions. You stop categorizing them into good or bad. You let them all pass through, grief, laughter, doubt, wonder. Because all of them are sacred, all of them belong, and each one brings you back to the fullness of your humanity. You begin reimagining what strength looks like. It's no longer the person who keeps going no matter what. It's the one who knows when to pause, when to say no, when to rest without guilt. Strength is the friend who admits they're struggling, the parent who says, I don't have all the answers, the partner who shows up with their heart open, even after it's been broken. You stop striving to be the strongest in the room. You start striving to be the most honest. And in that shift, you find a different kind of resilience. Not the kind built on denial, but on radical truth. You become more mindful of the spaces you allow yourself to enter. You notice how certain environments drain you, how certain conversations leave you anxious, how some relationships only thrive when you abandon yourself. And instead of pushing through, you pause. You evaluate. You ask, does this feel like peace or performance? And you start choosing peace, even when it means being alone, even when it means disappointing others. Because the cost of staying in places where you're not seen is too high, and you are no longer willing to pay with your presence. You begin surrounding yourself with gentleness, with people who hold space without fixing, with voices that uplift without pretending, with energy that feels calm, not chaotic. You choose softness, not as a luxury, but as a necessity, because you've learned that healing doesn't happen in harshness. It happens in warmth, in patience, in love that doesn't rush your process, but walks beside you in it. You give yourself permission to be nourished, not just needed, to be loved, not just tolerated, to be understood, not just explained away. And most beautifully, you begin to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. The child who danced without shame, the teenager who dreamed without limits, the version of you who believed that being alive was a miracle, not a burden. You begin to touch those parts again, not with regret, but with reverence. You realize they never left you. They've just been waiting for you to return. And now that you're coming back, you feel it in every breath, in every tear, in every smile that doesn't need a reason. You are remembering. And this remembering is not a return to what was, it's a rebirth into what always was. There comes a moment in your journey when you realize you're not trying to become someone else anymore. You're trying to come back to who you were before the world began dimming your light, before people called your sensitivity a flaw, before you were taught that your emotions were too heavy to carry, before you had to explain yourself just to be accepted. You begin to feel the grief of that loss, the slow erosion of selfhood in the name of being liked, approved, understood. But alongside the grief, you also begin to feel something else, a quiet joy, a liberation, because now you're peeling back the layers. You're unlearning. You're making space for the real you to reemerge, raw, radiant, and unapologetically whole. You start to sit with yourself in silence, Not the kind of silence that feels lonely, but the kind that feels like returning to a sacred place. You don't reach for your phone every time discomfort rises. You don't fill the silence with noise just to avoid your thoughts. You learn to be still, to breathe into the unease, to the way your body holds your stories, the way your heart softens when you stop running. You begin to realize that your presence is powerful, not because of what you do, but because of how deeply you are willing to be with yourself. You begin to see the moments you once labeled as weakness in a new light. The days you cried yourself to sleep, not because you were broken, but because your heart refused to stay numb. The times you said no, even though your voice trembled, because your soul knew it was necessary. The mornings you got out of bed when everything in you wanted to disappear. Those were not failures. They were victories, quiet ones, sacred ones. The kind of victories that don't get celebrated publicly, but transform you privately. You stop measuring your strength by how little you feel and begin honoring it by how deeply you continue to show up. You realize how long you've confused control with safety. You tried to manage every outcome, read every signal, prepare for every possible loss. You thought if you could just anticipate the pain, you could avoid it. But the truth is, control didn't protect you. It imprisoned you. It kept you stuck in your head, away from your body, away from presence. So now you begin to loosen your grip. You let go, not because you don't care, but because you're learning to trust. Trust that you'll be okay, even if things don't go according to plan. Trust that you don't need to earn rest. Trust that the right people will stay without needing to be chased. And in that trust, you begin to feel peace that doesn't rely on perfection. You begin to feel at home in your own skin. Not because everything is healed, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself in the process. You no longer shrink to make others comfortable. You no longer apologize for your laughter, your depth, your sensitivity. You wear your truth like a second skin, not heavy, not performative, just real. And the people who can meet you there, they feel like home too. You stop seeking connection from a place of lack. You stop giving your energy to those who treat your heart like an inconvenience. You start choosing people who choose you back, not out of obligation, but out of genuine resonance. You begin to see your boundaries not as walls, but as bridges. Bridges to your self-respect. Bridges to relationships built on mutual care. You set them not to keep people out, but to keep yourself safe within. You stop explaining your boundaries to those committed to crossing them. You realize that a boundary is not up for debate. It's a declaration. And those who respect them are the ones who deserve access to your inner world. You no longer feel guilt for protecting your peace. You no longer sacrifice your well-being in the name of being liked, because you've learned that the cost of people-pleasing is often yourself, and that's a price you're no longer willing to pay. You begin to redefine what healing actually looks like. It's not always morning meditations and green juice. Sometimes it's crying in your car. Sometimes it's sleeping for 12 hours. Sometimes it's saying no to everything so you can finally hear yourself think. Healing isn't always beautiful. Often it's gritty and uncomfortable. It's facing the parts of yourself you'd rather avoid. It's letting go of identities that once kept you safe. It's being honest about the habits that numb rather than nourish. And yet within all that mess, there is a sacredness. Because healing doesn't make you perfect. It makes you present. It returns you to the truth that you are already enough, even when you're still in process. You stop needing to explain your journey to people who haven't walked it. You no longer waste your breath trying to make your pain understandable to those who only see the surface. You realize that your story is valid, even if it doesn't come with a neat ending, even if it's still unfolding, even if it's messy. You hold your truth with tenderness, not defensiveness. You stop proving, you start honoring, because this path you're on, it's yours, and not everyone needs to understand it for it to be real. You begin to appreciate the beauty of slow growth, the kind that doesn't get recognition, the kind that happens quietly beneath the surface. You notice how your reactions have softened, how your patience has deepened, how you're no longer triggered by the things that used to unravel you. That's growth. You notice how you can sit in uncertainty a little longer now, how you don't need immediate answers, how you trust the unfolding. That's growth. You stop rushing, you stop forcing, you let things take the time they need. And in that slowness, you find a richness that speed could never offer. You reconnect with your inner world. You return to journaling, not because you're supposed to, but because your heart needs a place to land. You return to music that makes you feel deeply, to nature that reminds you of stillness. To art that helps you process emotions that words cannot hold. You make space for reflection, for curiosity, for wonder. And in that space, you remember how to feel alive, not just functionally, but spiritually. You begin to live from your center, not from your wounds. And everything begins to feel different, not perfect, but purposeful. You understand that wholeness is not about having no wounds. It's about weaving those wounds into wisdom. It's about allowing the broken parts of you to become openings, not scars to hide, but stories to share. You stop viewing yourself as someone to fix and start seeing yourself as someone to love. And that love, it becomes your anchor, your mirror, your medicine. It reminds you every day that you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become in the aftermath, and your becoming is sacred. You begin to understand that healing does not require you to return to who you were before the pain. In fact, you're not meant to return at all. You're meant to become, to evolve, to emerge from the fire carrying the embers of who you were and the light of who you're becoming. The goal isn't to forget what hurt you, it's to find peace with it. To look at your past not as something to escape, but as something that shaped your strength, your softness, your soul. You stop trying to erase the memories and start learning from them. You stop wishing it had been different and start asking, what did I gain? Not in a toxic positivity way, but in a deeply honest way. Because sometimes the only thing you gained was survival. And that in itself is something to honor. You begin to see that your survival wasn't passive. It was fierce. It was a decision made in the quiet of the night, in the loneliness of pain, in the heartbreak that refused to destroy you. You endured. And now you're choosing to do more than survive. You're choosing to live. Not for anyone else, not for appearance, not to prove you're okay, but because you are reclaiming your life as something sacred. You no longer carry your trauma as identity. You no longer introduce yourself through the lens of your wounds. You don't deny what happened, but you're no longer defined by it. You are something beyond your breaking. You begin to notice how the world mirrors back your internal state. When your mind is chaotic, everything feels like a mess. But when you pause, when you breathe, when you come back to yourself, the world softens too. The same street looks different. The same routine feels lighter. You realize it's not always about changing your external reality. Sometimes it's about changing the way you're present inside it. You stop waiting for things to be perfect before you feel peace. You find peace in the imperfection. You find joy in the ordinary. You find meaning in the small, overlooked moments that used to pass you by. You begin to reparent yourself, to sit with the inner child who never felt safe enough to express what they needed. You tell them, I see you now. You give them the love that was missing, the validation they craved, the protection they were denied. You become the adult they needed. And it's not always easy. Sometimes it hurts more than you expect. But the more you show up for them, the more they soften, the more they trust, and slowly the patterns begin to shift. You no longer act from old wounds. You act from awareness, from compassion, from choice. You stop reacting and start responding, with presence, not fear. You realize that letting go isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about acknowledging that some things are simply not meant to stay. People, habits, stories. You let them go, not in anger, but in love. You bless what was, even if it hurt. You thank it for what it taught you, even if the lesson came wrapped in pain. And in that release, you feel lighter. Not because everything's been resolved, but because you're no longer carrying what isn't yours to hold. Letting go becomes an act of self-respect, a declaration of freedom, a way to say, I choose myself, even if it means walking away. You stop running from discomfort. You sit in it. You ask what it's here to show you. You don't judge it. You don't try to numb it. You feel it fully. And in that feeling, something unexpected happens. You don't break. You bend, you stretch, you grow. You learn that emotions are not the enemy. They're messengers. When you listen to them without fear, they guide you home. Home to your truth, home to your boundaries, home to your deepest needs. And you begin to realize that your emotional depth isn't a flaw. It's a gift. One that allows you to move through life with authenticity, empathy, and power. You begin to value solitude differently. It's no longer loneliness. You find that your own company is not just enough. It's essential. You stop outsourcing your validation. You stop needing constant connection to feel whole. And when you do connect with others, it comes from fullness, not from lack. You no longer seek relationships to complete you. You seek them to expand you, to reflect what you already know, that you are worthy just as you are. You also begin setting standards for your peace. You no longer tolerate chaos as normal. You stop calling dysfunction passion. You stop mistaking inconsistency for mystery. You stop justifying emotional unavailability as complexity. You choose clarity. You choose communication. You choose consistency, not because it's boring, but because your nervous system deserves to rest. You've spent enough years in relationships that felt like roller coasters. Now you want something steady, something that doesn't hurt, something that feels like peace, and you no longer feel the need to apologize for that. You redefine love. It's not intensity. It's not possession. It's not sacrifice. Love is mutuality. It's presence. It's respect. It's someone who listens when you speak and still shows up when it's hard. It's someone who chooses you without needing to be convinced. It's someone who sees your scars and doesn't flinch, who doesn't require perfection to offer devotion. And as you redefine love, you also redefine what you offer. You stop overgiving to prove your worth. You stop shrinking to make someone else feel bigger. You offer love from your overflow, not your depletion, from your healing, not your wounds, and it changes everything. You begin to live more slowly, to taste your food, to watch the sun rise, to listen to your breath. You stop rushing through life as though there's something at the finish line worth missing the journey for. You begin to notice the sacred in the mundane, the way your fingers curl around a warm mug, the way the light dances on your wall, the way music makes your chest ache in a good way. You understand now that life isn't found in the big moments, it's found in the small ones, fully felt. And you give yourself permission to be fully present for them. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to forgive yourself, not just for what you did, but for who you had to be in order to survive, for the masks you wore, for the times you betrayed your own needs, for the silence you kept when you should have spoken, for the relationships you stayed in, for the dreams you abandoned. You forgive not to forget, but to set yourself free, because carrying shame serves no one. It only chains you to the past. But forgiveness, that's the key to becoming, the key to returning, the key to loving yourself again. There comes a point when you stop measuring your life by productivity. You stop viewing your worth through the lens of accomplishment. You no longer tie your value to how much you can get done in a day. The rush, the pressure, the endless need to prove yourself. It starts to feel hollow. You look at the calendar full of tasks and you feel your breath shorten, but you pause, you breathe. You ask yourself, what if rest is not laziness? What if slowing down is not weakness? What if doing less is how I make room for more of what matters? And with that thought, something shifts. You start releasing the shame that clings to stillness. You begin to honor the spaces between the doing. You start to notice how much of your energy has gone into trying to be enough for everyone. The way you've carried the weight of expectations, some spoken, some silent, all heavy. You remember the times you said yes when everything in you screamed no. The times you showed up out of guilt, not love. The times you poured from an empty cup and smiled through the depletion. And it hits you. You've been stretching yourself thin, not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of disappointing, fear of abandonment, fear of being seen as selfish. But now you're starting to understand that self-neglect isn't noble. It's a slow disappearance of the self, and you're not willing to disappear anymore. You begin making different choices, not loud ones, not dramatic ones, quiet ones. You go to bed earlier, you say, "I'm not available today." You turn off your notifications. You don't reply right away. You sit with your coffee without multitasking. You read something that has nothing to do with self-improvement. You walk without headphones. You write just to feel, not to achieve. These small acts, simple and often unnoticed, begin to rebuild you. You're not chasing transformation anymore. You're embodying it, not by becoming something else, but by becoming more of who you've always been underneath the noise. You notice how your body reacts to peace. It relaxes, your jaw unclenches, your breath deepens. That you don't have to live in hypervigilance. That joy isn't a trap. That love doesn't have to be earned through exhaustion. You let peace in slowly, gently, like light entering a darkened room. And each day you let it stay a little longer. You begin speaking to yourself differently, not with judgment, but with compassion. You catch the voice that says, "You should be further along," and you respond with, "I'm doing the best I can." You hear the old narratives trying to return. You're too sensitive. You're not enough. You're failing. And you interrupt them with truth, with kindness, with presence. You stop waiting for someone else to validate you. You look in the mirror, and even if your heart is heavy, you say, "I'm proud of you." And maybe at first you don't believe it, but you keep saying it. And one day your soul hears it and says, "Finally." You begin to trust the timing of your life. You stop comparing your path to someone else's highlight reel. You stop measuring your milestones against someone else's clock. You realize that blooming late is still blooming, that slow growth is still sacred, that your pace is your power. And instead of rushing towards some imagined destination, you begin to savor where you are. You begin to see that this moment, this exact breath, is not an obstacle to your life. It is your life, and you begin to live it with reverence. You start unlearning the stories that made you feel small, the ones that said you had to earn love, that softness made you weak, that being emotional made you irrational, that being too passionate made you too much. You question those beliefs. You trace them to their origin. And when you realize they're not yours, you let them go. You make room for new truths, that you are worthy just because you exist. That feeling deeply is a superpower. That softness is strength in its purest form. That being too much for some people simply means you're not meant to shrink for them. You begin creating a life that feels like truth. Not performance, not obligation, not what you were told it should look like. You begin designing your days around what makes your spirit feel at home. You allow your values to guide your decisions. You choose relationships that feel safe, not stimulating. You choose conversations that nourish, not deplete. You choose commitments that feel aligned, not draining. You're not building a life for appearance anymore. You're building a life for your soul. And in doing so, you begin to feel less like a stranger to yourself. You stop chasing closure from people who refuse to give it. You stop waiting for apologies that may never come. You stop needing explanations from those who left without words. Because you realize that closure isn't something you get from others. It's something you give to yourself. You say, "I don't understand what happened, but I'm choosing to let it go." You say, "I never got the ending I wanted, but I'm writing a new beginning." And you free yourself, not because you're okay with what happened, but because you're more committed to your peace than your pain. You start seeing life not as a test, but as a teacher. Every experience, every heartbreak, every joy, every mistake, every miracle is part of your curriculum. You stop labeling things as failures and start seeing them as lessons. You stop regretting the past and start mining it for wisdom. You stop fearing the future and start meeting it with curiosity. Life is no longer something happening to you. It's something unfolding through you. And that shift in perspective, that's where the magic lives. You begin to embody grace, not just toward others, but toward yourself. When you slip back into old patterns, you don't spiral, you notice. You pause, you begin again. When you feel overwhelmed, you don't numb, you breathe. You slow down, you ask for support. When you feel like giving up, you remember how far you've come, how many nights you made it through, how many storms you weathered alone. And you give yourself credit, Not because you need a reward, but because you deserve acknowledgement. Healing isn't linear, and you're still here, still showing up, still choosing growth. That, in itself, is a victory. And in all of this, you start to feel alive again. Not in the loud, performative way the world often demands, but in the quiet, rooted way that matters most. You notice how the wind feels on your skin, how your chest rises when you laugh, how your heart stirs when you see something beautiful. You don't need everything to be perfect to feel present. You don't need to have it all figured out to feel peace. You just need to be here, in this breath, in this body, in this moment. Because now you understand, this is where life lives. You begin to see that real transformation isn't loud. It's not always a break, even in the middle of grief, even in uncertainty, even in the quiet moments between the milestones. You laugh more, you dance in your kitchen, you sing badly in your car. You let yourself feel light, not because everything is okay, but because you've learned to hold both, joy and pain, light and shadow. You no longer believe you have to choose. You embrace it all. You start to feel connected again, not just to yourself, but to the world around you. You notice how the trees sway in rhythm with the wind, how the clouds move slowly across the sky like prayers, how the earth continues its turning regardless of your personal chaos. And in that noticing, you feel held. You feel supported by something larger than yourself, something that doesn't ask you to be perfect, something that says you belong. And that belonging doesn't come from doing, it comes from being, just as you are, breathing, existing, enough. You begin to live more honestly. You say what you mean. You express what you feel. You stop editing yourself to be more likable. You stop diluting your truth to avoid discomfort. You become more direct, not cruel, but clear. You speak from the heart. You own your story. And the people who can't meet you there, you let them go with love. Because honesty filters your life. It clears out the noise. It reveals what's real. And you no longer fear that revelation. You welcome it. And with every step, every breath, every small decision to return to yourself, you feel the shift, the peace, the power. Not loud, not flashy, but deep, steady, true. You're not trying to be someone else anymore. You're not trying to escape your life. You're simply choosing to be here, now fully. And in that presence, you realize you are not lost. You never were. You are and have always been finding your way home. You begin to notice how the small things, the ones that once passed by unnoticed, start to feel sacred. The warmth of tea in your hands on a quiet morning, the way light spills onto your bed sheets like a gentle invitation to begin again. The stillness that greets you when the world is just beginning to stir. These little moments, once drowned out by the volume of your busyness, now rise like soft prayers. Reminders that life does not demand grandeur to be meaningful. You don't need fireworks to feel alive. Sometimes it's the hush that holds the most truth. Sometimes it's the silence between breaths that teaches you how to live. You begin to hold space for your own contradictions. You stop needing to be one thing. You stop trying to be consistent in a way that denies your complexity. You let yourself be joyful and grieving, confident and uncertain, grounded and lost, all in the same breath. You stop labeling your emotions as right or wrong. You simply allow them to be. You understand now that the human heart was never meant to be neat. It was never meant to move in straight lines. You are a constellation of stories, layered with experiences, all of which deserve to be seen, held, honored. And in that seeing, you find your own wholeness again, not in perfection, but in the permission to feel it all. You begin showing up for your own needs before anyone else's, not in selfishness, but in sacred responsibility. You realize that when your own cup is empty, you have nothing left to pour into others. You stop rushing to fix everyone else's problems. You stop carrying pain that doesn't belong to you. You understand that love doesn't mean sacrifice without limit, that empathy doesn't require martyrdom, that being there for others doesn't mean abandoning yourself. You build a relationship with your own inner world so sturdy, so kind, that you stop begging others to soothe your wounds. You become the person who tends to them gently, patiently, like a garden that will bloom again. You begin to feel more grounded in your truth. There's a quiet confidence that rises, not from being right all the time, but from being real. You're no longer shaken by opinions that don't align with your soul. You no longer need to defend your path to those who can't see it. You no longer explain your healing to people who are committed to misunderstanding it. Your truth stands not because it's the loudest, but because it's rooted. And that rootedness changes the way you move through the world. You don't force, you don't chase, you align, you trust. You let things fall away without chasing after them, because what's meant for you won't need to be begged for. It will come, and it will stay. You begin to recognize that boundaries are not walls. They are declarations of self-love. You set them not to push people away, but to keep yourself intact. You no longer wait until you're through small moments of awareness. The way you respond differently to the same trigger, the way you choose rest instead of guilt, the way you let yourself take up space without apology. These are not things anyone else may notice, but you do. And that matters, because healing, real healing, is not a spectacle, it's a return to the parts of yourself that always knew, always waited, always hoped you'd come back. You begin to trust the whispers of your intuition, the ones you used to ignore, the ones that seemed too soft, too unclear, too inconvenient. You remember the times you overrode that inner voice because logic told you otherwise, or fear was louder, or someone else's opinion felt more important. And you remember the pain that followed, the ache of betraying yourself, but now you listen more closely, not to what shouts at you from outside, but to what nudges you gently from within. And though it may not always make sense at first, you follow it, step by step. And in doing so, you build a relationship with yourself that is rooted in trust. You begin to understand that self-love isn't always warm baths and affirmations. Sometimes it's holding yourself accountable. It's admitting when you've been avoiding the truth. It's facing the hard conversations you've delayed. It's doing the unglamorous, consistent work of becoming someone you respect. Self-love isn't always soft. It's also strong. It's boundaries. It's discipline. It's saying no to what doesn't align, even when saying yes would be easier. It's building a life that reflects your values, not your fears. And that kind of love, it's not always comfortable, but it's real, and it liberates you. You start acknowledging your inner seasons. There are times when you are blooming, creative, inspired, full of energy. And there are times when you're retreating, quiet, tired, introspective. You stop judging yourself for the ebb and flow. You stop forcing summer in the middle of winter. You allow yourself to rest when rest is needed, to slow down when your soul feels heavy. You understand that nothing in nature blooms all year, and you are not an exception. You allow yourself to cycle, to evolve, to shed, to pause. And in honoring that, you come into harmony with the natural rhythm of life itself. You begin to notice the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness feels like absence, like missing, like hunger for something that isn't there. But solitude feels like presence, like wholeness, like space where your soul can breathe. You start craving that space. You carve it out intentionally. You stop fearing time alone and begin cherishing it. You listen more closely to your thoughts. You start enjoying your own company. You become your own sanctuary, your own source of comfort. And that shift changes everything, because you no longer enter relationships from lack. You enter from fullness. You begin detaching from outcomes, not because you don't care, but because you trust. You trust that what's meant for you will find you. You trust that forcing things only leads to suffering. You trust that surrender isn't giving up, it's opening up. And so you do your part. You show up, you take the steps, you give your heart, but you let go of trying to control how it all unfolds. You no longer grasp, you allow. And in that allowing, you find peace that striving never gave you. You begin living not with desperation, but with deep inner confidence that life is always moving in your favor, even when you can't yet see how. You stop chasing the version of yourself that only exists in someone else's imagination. You stop trying to be who they want you to be, who your family expects, who your partner prefers, who your culture prescribes. you begin peeling back the layers of performance. You ask yourself, who am I when no one is watching? And you start honoring that version, the one who doesn't always have it together, the one who cries at random commercials, the one who gets excited about little things, the one who dreams big but also needs reassurance. That version, she is real, and she is enough. You notice how differently life feels when you let go of comparison. You stop scrolling through other people's highlights and using them as a ruler for your worth. You stop wishing your journey looked more like theirs. You realize that comparison is a thief, not just of joy, but of authenticity. It distracts you from your own unique path. It makes you question your own timing. And when you put the phone down, when you tune back into your own rhythm, you remember, your life is unfolding exactly as it's meant to. You are not behind. You are not missing out. You are right on time. You begin letting